The woman my entire family called that sad, bitter drunk across the street looked at me through her screen door and said, "I was wondering when you'd finally come." I had been warned about her my whole life. Not in dramatic terms. My father wasn't the dramatic type. He'd just say it quietly, the way he said everything. Don't talk to her. Don't wave at her. Don't wave at her. Don't let her pull you into whatever she's carrying. And I'd listened. For 26 years, I had listened. My name is Willa, or at least that's what everyone called me. Willa Crane, 29 years old, recently laid off from a marketing job in Columbus, back in my childhood home in Denton, Ohio, sleeping in the same twin bed I'd slept in at 14, because my life had quietly fallen apart in ways I hadn't told anyone about yet. I'd moved back 6 weeks earlier. My father had a bad hip and worse insurance, and my younger brother lived in Portland and wasn't coming back for anything short of a funeral. So it was me. It was always going to be me. The house was the same, the neighborhood was mostly the same, and across the street in the yellow house with the peeling shutters was Loretta. She had been there as long as I could remember, grey-haired even when I was small. Thin in a way that looked like grief rather than health. She kept odd hours. Lights on at 2 in the morning, curtains drawn until noon. The neighborhood kids had stories about her. I'd had stories about her. My father had never offered an explanation beyond "she's not someone you need to know." The first time I really saw her after coming home, she was pulling weeds from her front garden in the early morning, and she stopped and looked at me for a long moment before going back to what she was doing. I felt something strange pass through me, not fear, something older than fear. I didn't sleep well that night. My father's name was Eugene Crane, retired electrician, 63 years old and moving like a man who was 75. He had a good heart and a stubborn mouth, and he loved me in the specific, practical way that men of his generation loved daughters, by fixing things, by showing up, by never quite saying what he meant. He was also hiding something. I didn't know that yet. The first crack appeared 3 weeks after I moved back. I was helping him sort through some paperwork. He'd gotten behind on things, bills mixed with junk mail, mixed with old documents he'd shoved in a drawer and forgotten. I wasn't looking for anything, I was just trying to help. And then I found the letter. It was from an attorney in Cleveland, dated 8 months earlier. The subject line referenced something called the Hargrove estate, and my father's name appeared not as a family member or beneficiary, but as a contested party. I read it twice, then a third time. I didn't know what a contested party was in the context of an estate, not exactly, but I understood enough to know that someone had been fighting over money, and my father was involved, and he had never said a word about it. I put the letter back where I found it. I didn't say anything at dinner. I watched him eat his pot roast and complain about the Browns and pretend the world was exactly what he'd always told me it was. That night, I Googled the attorney. Then I Googled the Hargrove estate. What I found was a name, Howard Hargrove, deceased, formerly of Denton, Ohio, and a brief mention in a local obituary from 2 years prior. No surviving children, survived by a younger sister. The younger sister's name was Loretta. I stood in the kitchen for a long time with my phone in my hand and the refrigerator humming and my father asleep 20 feet away. The next morning, I walked across the street. She opened the door before I knocked. That was the moment she said it. "I was wondering when you'd finally come." And she stepped aside without asking my name, like she already knew it, like she'd been expecting this particular version of this particular morning for years. Her house was smaller inside than it looked from the street. Neat in a deliberate way, the way people keep things neat when order is all they have left. There were photographs on the walls, a lot of them, and a particular smell of old coffee and something floral I couldn't identify. She poured me coffee without asking, and sat across from me at her kitchen table and looked at me with the kind of eyes that have seen too many things go unsaid. "Your father told you to stay away from me. she said. My whole life, I said. She nodded, not surprised. Did he ever tell you why? No. She wrapped both hands around her mug. My brother Howard died 2 years ago. He left a will. The house, his savings, his investment accounts, all of it was supposed to go to me. She paused. I've been in a legal dispute ever since. I asked who the dispute was with. She looked at me steadily. Your father. The room went quiet in a way that felt physical. I want to be fair to him. I want to say that. My father had been good to me in the ways he knew how to be. He'd come to my college graduation even though it meant taking a bus because he'd let his license lapse. He'd sent me money when I was broke in my first apartment without making me feel terrible about needing it. He was not a cruel man. But he was capable of convincing himself that what he wanted was what he deserved. Loretta explained it to me slowly, the way someone explains something they've had to explain so many times it has become mechanical. Her brother Howard had been close with my father for 30 years. They had worked together when they were young. At some point, Loretta didn't know exactly when, or said she didn't, Howard had made my father the executor of his estate. There was a version of Howard's will that left a portion of his assets to my father's family. But there was another version, an earlier one. Howard came to me 3 months before he died, Loretta said. He was sick, he knew it. He sat right where you're sitting and he told me he'd made a mistake. He'd let Jean convince him to update his will in a way Howard didn't actually want. He said he'd been lonely and unwell, and he hadn't been thinking clearly. Her voice stayed flat, but her grip on the mug was tight. He said he wanted to fix it. Did he? He signed a revised will. His own attorney filed it. She paused. Your father's attorney is arguing it was signed under duress, that Howard wasn't competent. I thought about the letter. Contested party. How much money are we talking about? I asked, because I had to. The house, which is paid off and worth around $300,000. His brokerage account. Some savings bonds going back decades. She shook her head. It's not a fortune, but it was his, and it was supposed to be mine. I went home, and I looked at my father differently. Not with hate. I want to be clear about that too. It wasn't hate. It was something more like vertigo, the sensation of the floor shifting slightly under every memory you have. I thought about all the times he'd warned me away from Loretta. She's bitter. She causes trouble. She's not well. I had accepted those characterizations completely, the way children accept things, and then the way adults who have stopped questioning accept things. I had never pushed back. I had never thought to ask what she had actually done to earn that description. She had done nothing. She had simply existed as evidence of something my father didn't want examined. I spent 3 days doing research I felt guilty about and couldn't stop doing. I looked up Ohio probate law. I looked up undue influence and testamentary capacity, the legal terms for what Loretta's attorney was apparently arguing. I looked up the attorney my father had hired, a small firm in Akron, not the kind of place you'd go if you were confident you were right. I found Howard Hargrove's obituary again, and this time I read the whole thing. He had been a quiet man, it said, retired from the trades, no children, loved woodworking and the Cleveland Indians and his sister, who he called every Sunday without fail. Every Sunday without fail. I thought about my father, who had let me believe his oldest friend's only surviving family was a woman to be avoided. A sad drunk, a bitter troublemaker. I thought about how effective that had been, how completely I had accepted it, and something cold moved through me that I didn't have a name for yet. On the 4th day, I went back across the street. I brought Loretta coffee this time, from the good place on Maple that she'd mentioned she used to go to before her hip got bad. She looked at the cup and then looked at me, and something in her face shifted just slightly. Why are you doing this? She asked. Because I think I can help. I had been in marketing for 6 years. I was not a lawyer, but I was very good at finding patterns in information, at building timelines, at making arguments clear. And the more I looked at what Loretta had, the more I thought the problem wasn't the evidence, it was how it was organized. She had boxes, literal cardboard boxes full of documents, letters, medical records, bank statements. Howard had given her much of it before he died, along with the revised will. She had an attorney, an older woman in Cleveland who believed her case but had made slow progress. I started organizing. I need to explain what I found when I went through those boxes, because it matters. It wasn't just financial records. It was letters, handwritten, from Howard to Loretta and back. Their relationship was in those letters. The Sunday calls she'd mentioned weren't just obligation, they were genuine. Howard wrote about her the way people write about the people they trust most in the world. And in the last year of his life, the letters changed. Not dramatically, but if you read them in order, the way I did, over 2 long nights at Loretta's kitchen table, you could feel the shift. He started second-guessing himself more. He mentioned my father more. Jean thinks I should. Jean says it would be smarter to, in a way that looked, in retrospect, less like friendship and more like influence. There was one letter, dated 14 months before Howard died, where he wrote, "I feel like I've been turned around somehow and I can't find the way back to what I actually think." I photographed every letter, every document. I built a timeline in a spreadsheet that went back 15 years, tracking what I could verify, the will versions, the dates of changes, Howard's documented medical appointments, my father's visits. The pattern was clear. Every major change to Howard's estate documents had occurred within weeks of the period when Howard's medical records showed increased cognitive symptoms, small things, early things, the kind of things that are easy to dismiss in the moment and devastating in retrospect. My father had, whether consciously or through something he had convinced himself was just helping, made moves during the windows when Howard was least able to push back. I sent the timeline to Loretta's attorney. She called me 2 days later and was quiet for a moment before she said, "Where did you find all of this?" "It was already there," I said. "It just needed to be put in order." I have thought a lot about what I felt during those weeks, about what it means to love a parent and also see them clearly. My father had not held a gun to anyone. He had not forged documents. He had done something more ambient and more insidious. He had been present during vulnerability, and he had used that presence to shape things in his direction, and then he had spent 2 years defending it. I don't know if he thought of it as stealing. I think he had probably convinced himself that Howard had wanted it, really, that the revised will was the mistake rather than the original, that Loretta was unstable and wouldn't have managed the money properly anyway. I think my father was someone who was very good at making the story come out the way he needed it to. I had gone home to take care of him, and then I had taken 3 days to decide what to do with what I knew. On the 3rd day, I drove to my father's house. I had moved into a cheap month-to-month apartment by then, using money I didn't really have, because I couldn't stay there and also do what I was doing. And I sat down across from him at the same kitchen table I'd eaten dinner at 1,000 times. I told him what I'd found. I told him about the timeline. I told him that I had shared it with Loretta's attorney. He was quiet for a very long time. My father, who always had something to say. "She got in your head," he finally said. "No," I said. "The documents got in my head." He looked older than I had ever seen him look. Something in his face wanted to go toward anger and couldn't quite get there. "I did right by Howard," he said. "I was there for him. Your father was there for 20 years, and she calls once a week, and suddenly she gets everything." "He decided that," I said. "At the end, when he was thinking clearly, he decided that." "He was sick." "He was recovering," I said, because that was what the medical records showed. The revised will had been signed during a period of relative stability, documented as such by his own physician. His doctor said so. That's in the record. My father stared at the table. I wanted him to say something that would make this easier. I had spent 29 years watching him be, in most of the ways that mattered, a decent man. I had loved him the complicated way you love a parent who is mostly good and occasionally something else. I'm not trying to destroy you, I said, but I'm not going to pretend I don't know what I know. He didn't say anything else. I drove back to my apartment and sat in the parking lot for a long time before I could go inside. The case was resolved 4 months later, not a courtroom drama. Ohio probate disputes rarely are. Loretta's attorney filed the additional documentation, the opposing counsel ran their analysis, and the estate mediator ultimately agreed that the revised will represented Howard's competent and documented final wishes. The earlier version, the one my father had benefited from, was set aside. My father did not go to prison. That's not how this works most of the time. What he lost was the inheritance and the case and the version of himself that had believed he was owed something. His attorney's fees had been substantial. He was not destitute, but he was diminished in the specific way that people are diminished when something they've built over years comes apart. He called me once after it was over. He said he hoped I was satisfied. I said I was sorry it had gone the way it had. I meant both things equally, which is probably the most honest I have ever been. Loretta sold the yellow house 6 months later and moved closer to her daughter in Cincinnati. Before she left, she knocked on the door of my apartment. I'd given her the address, and she stood on my little concrete step with a paper bag and she said, "I want you to have something." Inside the bag was a small wooden box. Howard had made it. His name was burned into the bottom in the uneven lettering of someone who had learned woodworking late in life and loved it anyway. "He would have liked you," she said. "He liked people who paid attention." I kept the box on my windowsill. I put small things in it, a ring I didn't wear, a few old photographs, the kind of things that don't have a better place to live. I think about my father sometimes, in the particular way you think about someone you love, who turned out to be less than you needed them to be, not constantly, not with rage. Just sometimes, when I'm driving or washing dishes, a thought surfaces and I let it be there and then it passes. I think about what he said, "She got in your head," and I think about all the ways I had let him construct the world for me, all the years I'd looked at a woman across a street and seen what I'd been told to see instead of what was there. The box sits on my windowsill. The house across the street has new owners now, a young couple who are already repainting the shutters. Loretta's garden has been pulled up and replanted with something more manageable. Some things get buried and stay buried. Some things, if you're paying attention and willing to look at what you find, come back to the surface. I'm still learning which is which, but I'm paying attention now. That's the part I'm keeping. I still think about the moment I put that letter back in the drawer, the one from the attorney in Cleveland. I smoothed it down, closed the drawer quietly, and went to eat dinner with my father like nothing had happened, like the floor hadn't just shifted under everything I thought I knew about him. That choice, to go back across the street, to keep looking, to build that timeline even when part of me desperately wanted an excuse to stop, that's the thing I come back to most. Not the court outcome, not the wooden box Loretta gave me, just that one quiet decision to not look away. I think about what would have happened if I hadn't. My father would have kept what wasn't his. Loretta would have spent whatever years she has left fighting a battle she couldn't win alone. And Howard's last clear wish, signed when he was finally thinking straight, finally free enough to say what he actually wanted, would have meant nothing. That's not a small thing. The consequences of looking away aren't always dramatic. Sometimes they're just a slow erasure of someone who deserved better. My father wasn't a monster. That's the part that's hardest to explain to people. He was a man who had convinced himself, over years of small rationalizations, that what he wanted was what was fair. That's actually more frightening than cruelty, in a way. Cruelty knows what it is. What my father did lived comfortably inside a story where he was still the good guy. Seeing that clearly, really seeing it, not flinching away from it, required something I hadn't known I had. Not just the willingness to look, but the ability to read what I found without letting love distort it. I had to hold two things at once. This is my father, and this is also what he did. Most people will choose one or the other. I understand why. It's easier. But I think there's a kind of integrity that lives in the space between those two things. The kind that says, I can love you and still tell the truth about you. I can grieve what I've lost about you and still not pretend I didn't see it. What carried me through those weeks wasn't anger. Anger would have burned out. It was something steadier. The conviction that Loretta deserved to have someone pay attention, the stubbornness to keep organizing boxes at midnight when I was tired and sad and questioning everything, and the basic moral sense that a dying man's true wishes should mean something in this world. I'm not special for doing what I did. I had skills that happened to be useful, and I was in the right place at the right time, but I did choose to use them. That part wasn't accidental. The wooden box sits on my windowsill. Some mornings I look at it and feel the weight of everything it represents. Howard's careful hands, Loretta's long patience, my father's slow unraveling, my own. And I think paying attention is not passive. It is the most demanding thing a person can do. It asks you to see what's actually there instead of what you've been told is there. It asks you to act on what you find, even when acting is costly. I'm still learning how to do that, but I'm not looking away anymore.